We're ready now to discuss the 6 parts of discourse. We've discussed the 3 artistic modes of persuasion, the 4 divisions of rhetoric, the 5 canons of rhetoric. Now we're on to the 6 parts of discourse. This is the last part of the elements of rhetoric, and then there will be a bonus lecture which will either show up this week or next on stasis theory, which is really an additional lesson on invention. But don't let me get ahead of myself. Let's keep the focus on the 6 parts of discourse. A composition or speech course will teach you to arrange your speech or your composition by your introduction, your main body, and your conclusion. The main body would then have 3 arguments or 3 main points, and that's really a boiled down version of the 6 parts of discourse. The 6 parts of discourse are more elaborate, and really there are a lot of teachers of rhetoric have through the years come up with a huge number of parts of discourse. In fact, one criticism I think Aristotle made was that in many cases they just added far too many parts of discourse. And so you'd have, 3 different introductions. You'd have, your proofs would be divided into different categories and types, and so on. So over the years, rhetoricians have been able to narrow it down to 6 main parts, and then on top of that, there's a lot of debate over how many of these parts of discourse are even necessary to every discourse. Suffice it to say that not all 6 are necessary in every case. We want you to know what the 6 parts are, how they work. We want you to practice using them with the understanding that some of these parts of discourse won't be necessary in certain cases. But if you have them at your disposal, you decide then whether you use them or not. For the sake of this class, in most cases from this point forward, we'll want you to use all 6 parts of discourse. Now, the 6 parts of discourse are the introduction, or the Greek name is exordium, the statement of facts, or the Greek name is narratio, the division, or the Greek name partitio, the confirmatio, or confirmation, the refutatio, or refutation, and then the conclusion, which the Greek name for that is the peroratio. All right, I thought you'd enjoy a little Greek thrown in with it. But for the most part, we'll stick with the English names. Let me explain what these 6 parts of discourse are. The introduction is pretty obvious. We are all familiar with that. If you've taken a speech class or a composition class, then you know about the introduction. I probably need to say very little about it, except that I do want you to understand what the purpose of the introduction is. Really, the introduction is not in order to persuade your audience. Your persuading will take place really when you get to the proofs, the confirmatio, the refutatio, the confirmation, refutation. That's where the main part of your persuading takes place. However, the introduction plays a very important role in preparing your audience for what you're going to say. Your introduction is a kind of persuasion, and I want you to understand this. What you're persuading your audience to do is to give you a hearing. It is recommended, in fact, that before you try to persuade your audience of anything, you just let them get used to the sound of your voice. That's why when preachers get up to preach, often they'll just small talk or chat for a little while. They might compliment the church or have something nice to say. They might tell a joke or some humorous story or something like that. A lot of that is just William Safire gave the 10 elements of a great speech, and the first thing he said is, shake hands with your audience. I like to say it that way. Before you start in on your audience, just shake their hand. A friend of mine is known for his blunt and sometimes heavy-handed approach to people, preaching, and so on. And there was one case where he and I were at dinner with several other people, and one of the other people had made some comments in a sermon that he didn't particularly care for, and he kind of accosted him at the table. And later I said to him, you know, I wrestled in high school, my boys wrestle. I said, before the match, every match, even in practice, the boys have to shake hands with each other. And I said, you know, it'd probably be good if you shake hands before you launch an attack. That's what we're talking about. The introduction is the handshake before you get started. There are 3 goals of an introduction. The first is to make your audience receptive. The second, to make them attentive. The third, to make them well-disposed. Receptive really just means willing to listen to you. Attentive means that they're interested in what you're going to say. You have a job to tell them why they should care about what you're going to say. And then well-disposed means that they're friendly to your case. Receptive means friendly to you, and well-disposed means they're friendly to your case. That's the work of the introduction. We will take some time to go into these in more depth. But I'll just say this, that rarely is an abrupt entry into the main body of the speech appropriate. You usually need to set the table before you serve the dinner. All right? Next is the statement of facts, also known as the narratio, or I like to say the narration. All right? You are narrating to your audience. The statement of facts is, I mean, that's about as simple an explanation as what we could give. You are giving the facts in the case. You may give the background, you might give the history if you're preaching, if you're a guy. You're going to explain the text before you start making applications from it, so that your audience knows that you actually got your points from the text, which is important or ought to be important to an audience or a congregation. So you're just laying out all the facts, and you're going to draw from those facts later on when you're making your case, when you're making your actual arguments. That's the statement of facts. Aristotle argued that the introduction was not always necessary, but the statement of facts, he said, was always necessary. It's always necessary to give some background. You need to walk your audience up to your proofs, and that's really what you're doing. It's like the baseball player, the batter walking up to the batter's box. There's that preparation for the arguments. There are 3 qualities recommended for a narratio, or the statement of facts: brevity, clarity, plausibility. Brevity, your statement of facts should be brief. It shouldn't be an elaborate statement of facts. Clarity, it should be very clear. This really ought to be the clearest part of your argument. Again, you're setting the table. So you want all the different dishes that you're serving to be visible to your audience. And then plausible. Probably the most important part of a good statement of facts is that it be plausible, be believable, that something that they can accept If you lose them then, or if you're misrepresenting the case, your audience won't listen to what you have to say. The next part is the division, or the partitio. I like to, the Greek word or the Greek name is somewhat descriptive. It is where you're showing the partitions in the speech. All right? Now, this is a point where rhetoric, ancient rhetoric, departs from what modern speech teachers will tell you. Because a modern speech teacher will say that you should never tell your audience what you're going to say. It goes against the old speechwriter's mantra. Again, William Safire, who was a speechwriter for, I believe, for Ronald Reagan. Safire gave the speechwriter's mantra. If you go to the speechwriters convention, he said, you'll hear speechwriters all saying, mumbling together in unison, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. The division is really that part of telling them what you're going to tell them. The division includes your thesis statement. The best recommendation that I can give, whether you're writing a composition or preparing a speech, is that somewhere in the course of your preparation, you sit down and in one sentence explain what your speech is about. All right? That's important, especially because of the tendency some people have to ramble and be all over the place in their message. That thesis will help you as the speaker to keep your focus. It is, whether you're going to use it in the speech or not, it is important, it is important that you be able to describe your speech in one clear statement. That is your thesis statement. But the division, which includes a thesis statement, includes more than that. In many cases, it is good and appropriate to tell the audience what you will be arguing, to tell them what your main points will be even. You don't always want to do it. We will discuss this at length, but let me make this analogy for you. If I was going to, you and I were going to go to a restaurant, and I'm going to drive with my family, and you're going to drive with your family in a separate car. And we're going to drive across town or to a town 15 minutes away. You're going to follow me, but it's nice if I tell you this is the way we're going so that there aren't unexpected turns. We're going this way. We're going to go down to this stoplight. We're going to turn left. We're going to follow this road. And then you'll see the restaurant on the right. This is the place that we're going. You appreciate that. You have some idea of where you're going. And that's the point of the division, is to tell your audience this is where we're headed. That's the, let's see, the third part of discourse. The fourth part of discourse is essentially, the fourth and fifth are the proofs. They can fall under that main heading of proofs. The confirmation and the refutation. The confirmation is really your positive proofs. This is the nut. This is the main body. This is the main part where you are persuading your audience. Everything up to this point has prepared your audience for your case, for your arguments. Now you're presenting your actual arguments. And along with those arguments, you're also presenting the reasoning, the rationale, the grounds for making that argument. You also, and we mentioned this when we talked about the 5 canons, almost as important as inventing your arguments is arranging them persuasively. There are 2 ways to order your proofs, your actual proofs. You can order them according to strength, or you can order them by some other obvious way. So if you do it by strength, you want to start with your strongest or almost your strongest argument, and you want to put your weaker arguments in the middle, not at the end. But sometimes the arguments are all pretty equal in strength, and in that case, you want to pick, perhaps start with the argument everyone would anticipate or everyone would be familiar with in advance. And those are some things we will discuss at greater depth when we talk about the confirmatio, the proofs. The confutatio or refutatio, the refutation, really is the part of your discourse where you anticipate the objections that could be raised to your case and you answer them. You might have a hostile audience and you may need to start with your refutation. You might need to start by refuting a case that's strongly believed by your audience. Sometimes you need to make a proof, a positive proof, and then answer objections to that proof before you move on to the next. So you would intersperse confirmatio and refutatio and go back and forth between them. But essentially, in your refutation, you are seeking to destroy, to smash your opponent's arguments. To show that they're wrong, or to show that they're weak, or to show that they haven't considered everything that they should consider. Of course, you want to start with your opponent's strongest arguments. If you can effectively answer their strongest arguments, you may not need to answer weaker arguments later on. We'll discuss that again in more detail later on. The final, or sixth part of discourse is the conclusion, or the peroratio. The conclusion is really the summary of what you've argued, and a final appeal to believe, for your audience to believe what you've said. There are three things really that your conclusion ought to do. It should summarize your arguments, it should cast your opponents in a negative light, and it should arouse sympathy for your case. You want to inspire your audience so that they'll believe you, and in fact go beyond believing you and actually put it into practice, or hang on to it and it will become a part of their thinking. You want to amplify any points made. You want to make a final appeal. This really, your pathetic proofs or emotional arguments belong here, or final emotional appeals need to be made at this point, and just rehearse your main points. So that's your 6 parts of discourse.